T318 Applied Network Security. Chapter 1 Introduction to Security. Cryptographic Algorithms and Protocols. Cryptographic algorithms and protocols can be grouped into four main areas. Symmetric encryption, used to conceal the contents of blocks or streams of data of any size, including messages, files, encryption keys, and passwords. Asymmetric encryption, used to conceal small blocks of data, such as encryption keys and hash function values, which are used in digital signatures. Data integrity algorithms, used to protect blocks of data, such as messages, from alteration. Authentication protocols, schemes based on the use of cryptographic algorithms designed to authenticate the identity of entities. What is security? Computer security, the protection afforded to an automated information system in order to attain the applicable objectives of preserving the integrity, availability, and confidentiality of information system resources, NIST Computer Security Handbook. Network and Internet security, measures to deter, prevent, detect, and correct security violations that involve transmission of information, stallings, cryptography, and network security. Computer security. The NIST Computer Security Handbook defines the term computer security as the protection afforded to an automated information system in order to attain the applicable objectives of preserving the integrity, availability, and confidentiality of information system resources, includes hardware, software, firmware, information/data, and telecommunications. Computer security objectives. 1. Confidentiality. Data confidentiality assures that private or confidential information is not made available or disclosed to unauthorized individuals. Privacy assures that individuals control or influence what information related to them may be collected and stored, and by whom and to whom that information may be disclosed. 2. Integrity. Data integrity assures that information and programs are changed only in a specified and authorized manner. System integrity assures that a system performs its intended function in an unimpaired manner, free from deliberate or inadvertent unauthorized manipulation of the system. 3. Availability assures that systems work promptly and service is not denied to authorized users. Others. Authenticity accountability. Figure 1.1. Essential network and computer security requirements. Breach of security levels of impact. Low. The loss could be expected to have a limited adverse effect on organizational operations, organizational assets, or individuals. Moderate. The loss could be expected to have a serious adverse effect on organizational operations, organizational assets, or individuals. High. The loss could be expected to have a severe or catastrophic adverse effect on organizational operations, organizational assets, or individuals. Impact of security breaches. How do security breaches impact organizations? 1. Electiveness of primary operations are reduced. 2. Financial loss. 3. Damage to assets. 4. Harm to individuals. Different levels of impact. E.g., FIPS, Publication 199 Deans, low/minor, moderate/significant, high/severe. Computer security challenges. Security is not simple. Potential attacks on the security features need to be considered. Procedures used to provide particular services are often counterintuitive. It is necessary to decide where to use the various security mechanisms. Requires constant monitoring. Is too often an afterthought. Security mechanisms typically involve more than a particular algorithm or protocol. Security is essentially a battle of wits between a perpetrator and the designer. Little benefit from security investment is perceived until a security failure occurs. Strong security is often viewed as an impediment to efficient and user-friendly operation. OSI security architecture. Security attack. Any action that compromises the security of information owned by an organization. Security mechanism. A process, or a device incorporating such a process, that is designed to detect, prevent, or recover from a security attack. Security service. A processing or communication service that enhances the security of the data processing systems and the information transfers of an organization. Intended to counter security attacks, and they make use of one or more security mechanisms to provide the service. Threats and attacks. RFC 4949. Threat. A potential for violation of security which exists when there is a circumstance, capability, action, or event that could breach security and cause harm. That is, a threat is a possible danger that might exploit a vulnerability. Attack. An assault on system security that derives from an intelligent threat. That is, an intelligent act that is a deliberate attempt, especially in the sense of a method or technique, to evade security services and violate the security policy of a system. Types of attacks. 1. Passive attack. Make use of information but not affect system resources, for example, release message contents. Traffic analysis. Relatively hard to detect, but easier to prevent. 2. Active attack. Alter system resources or operation, for example, masquerade, replay, modification, denial of service, DOS. Relatively hard to prevent, but easier to detect. In this diagram, we can see the types of attacks. Types of attacks continues. Passive attack. Make use of information, but not affect system resources, for example, release message contents. Traffic analysis. Relatively hard to detect, but easier to prevent. Passive attacks are in the nature of eavesdropping on or monitoring of transmissions. Goal of the opponent is to obtain information that is being transmitted. Two types of passive attacks are the release of message contents. Traffic analysis. Types of attacks continues. Active attack. Alter system resources or operation, for example, masquerade. Replay. Modification. Denial of service, DOS. Relatively hard to prevent, but easier to detect. Active attacks. Involve some modification of the data stream or the creation of a false stream. Difficult to prevent because of the wide variety of potential physical, software, and network vulnerabilities. Goal is to detect attacks and to recover from any disruption or delays caused by them. Masquerade. Takes place when one entity pretends to be a different entity. Usually includes one of the other forms of active attack. Replay. Involves the passive capture of a data unit and its subsequent retransmission to produce an unauthorized effect. Modification of messages. Some portion of a legitimate message is altered, or messages are delayed or reordered to produce an unauthorized effect. Denial of service. Prevents or inhibits the normal use or management of communications facilities. Release message contents. In Figure 1.2, Bob initiates a release message to communicate with Alice. However, Darth intercepts the message and reads its contents, gaining unauthorized access to the information intended for Alice. Traffic analysis. In Figure 1.3, which involves traffic analysis, Bob sends a message to Alice. However, Darth engages in observing the pattern of messages sent from Bob to Alice. This implies that Darth is analyzing the flow and frequency of communication between Bob and Alice, potentially gathering information about their interaction without directly intercepting the message content. Masquerade attack. In Figure 1.4, a masquerade attack occurs. Bob did not actually send a message to Alice, but Darth sends a message to Alice that appears to be from Bob. In other words, Darth is pretending to be Bob and sending a deceptive message to Alice, potentially with malicious intent, such as spreading misinformation or attempting to gain unauthorized access. The phrase, "on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog," highlights the idea that online, people can maintain anonymity, making it difficult to ascertain their true identity or characteristics. Replay attack. In Figure 1.5, a replay attack takes place. Initially, Bob sends a message to Alice. However, Darth captures this message from Bob to Alice. Later on, Darth replays or resends the captured message to Alice. This type of attack involves intercepting and retransmitting previously recorded data, potentially causing unauthorized actions or deceit in communication. Modification attack. In Figure 1.5, a modification attack occurs. Bob intends to send a message to Alice, but Darth intercepts and alters the message before it reaches Alice. In this scenario, Darth manipulates the content of the message sent by Bob, which can lead to unauthorized changes, misinformation, or malicious intent, compromising the integrity of the communication between Bob and Alice. Denial of service attack. In Figure 1.6, a denial of service (DOS) attack occurs. Darth, the malicious actor, disrupts the service provided by the server. In a denial of service attack, the attacker overwhelms the targeted server or network with a flood of traffic, making it difficult or impossible for legitimate users to access the service. This results in a denial of service to those users, causing inconvenience or harm to the normal functioning of the system or network. Defining a security service, ITUTX. 800. Service that is provided by a protocol layer of communicating systems and that ensures adequate security of the systems or of data transfers, IETF RFC 2828. A processing or communication service that is provided by a system to give a specific kind of protection to system resources. Security services implement security policies and are implemented by security mechanisms. Table 1.2 Security Services, X800. Defining a security service continues. Authentication. Concerned with assuring that a communication is authentic. In the case of a single message, assures the recipient that the message is from the source that it claims to be from. In the case of ongoing interaction, assures the two entities are authentic and that the connection is not interfered with in such a way that a third party can masquerade as one of the two legitimate parties. Two specific authentication services are defined in X800. Peer Entity Authentication. Data Origin Authentication. Access Control. The ability to limit and control the access to host systems and applications via communications links. To achieve this, each entity trying to gain access must first be identified or authenticated so that access rights can be tailored to the individual. Data confidentiality. The protection of transmitted data from passive attack. Broadest service protects all user data transmitted between two users over a period of time. Narrower forms of service includes the protection of a single message or even specific fields within a message. The protection of traffic flow from analysis. This requires that an attacker not be able to observe the source and destination, frequency, length, or other characteristics of the traffic on a communications facility. Data integrity. Can apply to a stream of messages, a single message, or selected fields within a message. Connection-oriented integrity service, one that deals with a stream of messages, assures that messages are received as sent with no duplication, insertion, modification, reordering, or replays. A connectionless integrity service, one that deals with individual messages without regard to any larger context, generally provides protection against message modification only. Non-repudiation. Prevents either sender or receiver from denying a transmitted message. When a message is sent, the receiver can prove that the alleged sender, in fact, sent the message. When a message is received, the sender can prove that the alleged receiver, in fact, received the message. Availability service. Protects a system to ensure its availability. This service addresses the security concerns raised by denial of service attacks. It depends on proper management and control of system resources and thus depends on access control service and other security services. Security mechanisms. Techniques designed to prevent, detect, or recover from attacks. No single mechanism can provide all services. Common in most mechanisms, cryptographic techniques. Specific security mechanisms from ITUTX. 800, encipherment, digital signature, access control, data integrity, authentication exchange, traffic padding, routing control, notarization. Pervasive security mechanisms from ITU-TX. 800. Trusted functionality, security label, event detection, security audit trail, security recovery. Security mechanisms, X800. Specific security mechanisms, encipherment. Digital signatures, access controls, data integrity, authentication exchange, traffic padding, routing control, notarization, pervasive security mechanisms, trusted functionality, security labels, event detection, security audit trails, security recovery, Table 1.3. Security mechanisms, X800. Fundamental security design principles, economy of mechanism, fail-safe defaults, complete meditation, open design, separation of privilege, least privilege, least common mechanism, psychological acceptability, isolation, encapsulation, modularity, layering, least astonishment, fundamental security design principles, continues. Economy of mechanism means that the design of security measures embodied in both hardware and software should be as simple and small as possible. Relatively simple, small design is easier to test and verify thoroughly. With a complex design, there are many more opportunities for an adversary to discover subtle weaknesses to exploit that may be difficult to spot ahead of time. Fail-safe defaults means that access decisions should be based on permission rather than exclusion. The default situation is lack of access, and the protection scheme identifies conditions under which access is permitted. Most file access systems and virtually all protected services on client/server use fail-safe defaults. Complete mediation means that every access must be checked against the access control mechanism. Systems should not rely on access decisions retrieved from a cache. To fully implement this, every time a user reads a field or record in a file or a data item in a database, the system must exercise access control. This resource-intensive approach is rarely used. Open design means that the design of a security mechanism should be open rather than secret. Although encryption keys must be secret, encryption algorithms should be open to public scrutiny. Is the philosophy behind the NIST program of standardizing encryption and hash algorithms. Separation of privilege, defined as a practice in which multiple privilege attributes are required to achieve access to a restricted resource. Multi-factor user authentication is an example which requires the use of multiple techniques, such as a password and a smart card, to authorize a user. Least privilege means that every process and every user of the system should operate using the least set of privileges necessary to perform the task. An example of the use of this principle is role-based access control. The system security policy can identify and define the various roles of users or processes, and each role is assigned only those permissions needed to perform its functions. Least common mechanism means that the design should minimize the functions shared by different users, providing mutual security. This principle helps reduce the number of unintended communication paths and reduces the amount of hardware and software on which all users depend, thus making it easier to verify if there are any undesirable security implications. Psychological acceptability implies that the security mechanisms should not interfere unduly with the work of users, while at the same time meeting the needs of those who authorize access. Where possible, security mechanisms should be transparent to the users of the system, or at most introduce minimal obstruction. In addition to not being intrusive or burdensome, security procedures must reflect the user's mental model of protection. Isolation applies in three contexts. Public access systems should be isolated from critical resources to prevent disclosure or tampering. Processes and files of individual users should be isolated from one another, except where it is explicitly desired. Security mechanisms should be isolated in the sense of preventing access to those mechanisms. Encapsulation can be viewed as a specific form of isolation based on object-oriented functionality. Protection is provided by encapsulating a collection of procedures and data objects in a domain of its own, so that the internal structure of a data object is accessible only to the procedures of the protected subsystem, and the procedures may be called only at designated domain entry points. Modularity refers both to the development of security functions as separate, protected modules and to the use of a modular architecture for mechanism design and implementation. Layering refers to the use of multiple, overlapping protection approaches, addressing the people, technology, and operational aspects of information systems. The failure or circumvention of any individual protection approach will not leave the system unprotected. Least astonishment means that a program or user interface should always respond in the way that is least likely to astonish the user. The mechanism for authorization should be transparent enough to a user that the user has a good intuitive understanding of how the security goals map to the provided security mechanism. Attack surfaces. An attack surface consists of the reachable and exploitable vulnerabilities in a system. Examples: open ports on outward-facing web and other servers, and code listening on those ports. Services available on the inside of a firewall. Code that processes incoming data, email, XML, Office documents, and industry-specific custom data exchange formats. Interfaces, SQL, and web forms. An employee with access to sensitive information vulnerable to a social engineering attack. Attack surface categories. Network attack surface refers to vulnerabilities over an enterprise network, wide area network, or the internet. Software attack surface refers to vulnerabilities in application, utility, or operating system code. Human attack surface refers to vulnerabilities created by personnel or outsiders. Defense in depth and attack surface. In Figure 1.7, security risks are categorized based on defense depth and attack surface size. Low risk exists when defense is deep and the attack surface is small. Medium risks occur when defense is deep with a large attack surface, or when defense is shallow with a small attack surface. High risk is associated with shallow defense and a large attack surface. Attack tree, a branching hierarchical data structure that represents a set of potential techniques for exploiting security vulnerabilities. The security incident that is the goal of the attack is represented as the root node of the tree, and the ways that an attacker could reach that goal are represented as branches and subnodes of the tree. The final nodes on the paths outward from the root, leaf nodes, represent different ways to initiate an attack. The motivation for the use of attack trees is to effectively exploit the information available on attack patterns. In Figure 1.8, the attack scenario involves an attack tree for internet banking authentication. If a user's credentials are compromised, it creates a vulnerability in the system. A malicious software is then installed to exploit this vulnerability. Following this, the attacker may exploit additional vulnerabilities, potentially using hidden code or worms to further compromise the security of the internet banking system. This sequence of events represents a layered attack, starting with the compromise of user credentials and progressively exploiting weaknesses in the system through the use of malicious software and additional exploits. Figure 1.9 Model for Network Security. In Figure 1.9, the model for network security involves a sender wanting to transmit a secure message to a recipient. The process includes a security-related transformation, represented as secure information, applied to the message before it becomes a secure message block. The secure message block is then transmitted through an information channel to reach the recipient. Upon arrival, the secure message block undergoes another security-related transformation before being converted back to the original message block for the recipient. This model illustrates the steps taken to secure the information during transmission, emphasizing the use of security-related transformations to protect the message. Network Access Security Model. In Figure 1.10, the Network Access Security Model depicts a scenario where opponents, both human, for example hackers, and software-based, for example, viruses, worms, attempt to access the system through a channel or tunnel. The gatekeeper function serves as a protective barrier against unauthorized access. The information system encompasses various components such as computer resources, processor, memory, I/O, data, processes, software, and internal security controls. The model emphasizes the need for robust gatekeeping mechanisms to safeguard the information system against both human and software-based threats seeking unauthorized access through the channel or tunnel. Unwanted access. Placement in a computer system of logic that exploits vulnerabilities in the system and that can affect application programs as well as utility programs such as editors and compilers. Programs can present two kinds of threats: information access threats. Intercept or modify data on behalf of users who should not have access to that data. Service threats. Exploit service flaws in computers to inhibit use by legitimate users. Standards. National Institute of Standards and Technology. NIST is a U.S. federal agency that deals with measurement science, standards, and technology related to U.S. government use and to the promotion of U.S. private sector innovation. Despite its national scope, NIST Federal Information Processing Standards, FIPS, and Special Publications, SP, have a worldwide impact. Internet Society. ISOC is a professional membership society with worldwide organizational and individual membership. Provides leadership in addressing issues that confront the future of the Internet and is the organization home for the groups responsible for Internet infrastructure standards. ITU-T, the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, is an international organization within the United Nations system in which governments and the private sector coordinate global telecom networks and services. The ITU Telecommunication Standardization Sector, ITU-T, is one of the three sectors of the ITU, and whose mission is the development of technical standards covering all fields of telecommunications. ISO. The International Organization for Standardization is a worldwide federation of national standards bodies from more than 140 countries. ISO is a non-governmental organization that promotes the development of standardization and related activities with a view to facilitating the international exchange of goods and services and to developing cooperation in the spheres of intellectual, scientific, technological, and economic activity. In Table 1.4, various security services and their mechanisms are outlined. For instance, the Peer Entity Authentication Service employs mechanisms such as encipherment, digital signatures, and authentication exchange to ensure mutual verification of identities in communication. Another service, Traffic Flow Confidentiality, utilizes mechanisms like encipherment, traffic padding, and routing control to maintain the confidentiality of data flow. Encipherment is used to protect communication channels, while traffic padding and routing control help obscure patterns and manage communication paths, respectively. The table illustrates how different security services leverage specific mechanisms to address diverse aspects of information and communication protection.
The end of Chapter 1.